Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. However, even after much consideration, he couldn't think of anything that would help him speed up his cultivation progress. And the heavenly dragonfish weren't really an option anymore. I guess I'll have to concoct some pills, he murmured under his breath. Although the techniques in the Eternal Lands differed from those in the Heavenspan realm, and were very costly, Bai Xiaochun couldn't think of any other options. Most importantly, he had a lot of medicinal plants in his bag of holding. I also have some fish jerky left over. He had actually caught too many fish to eat at once, and had therefore dried some of it out to save for later. I bet people would pay a pretty penny for jerky like this. Although concocting some pills seemed like an exciting prospect, he also hesitated. After all, throughout all the years, it had become obvious that strange things happened whenever he concocted pills. And if anything disastrous happened in Saint Emperor City so soon after the heavenly dragonfish incident, it would likely be very bad for him. Another half a month went by in which Bai Xiaochun went about his cleanup work. The dragonfish were completely back to normal, and he could only grit his teeth as he watched the days go by. Eventually, he made his decision. He bought the equipment he needed to concoct medicine, and then spent several days making all the necessary preparations. Only then did he murmur, "I'll just be really careful. Everything should be fine." Perhaps it was because his skill in medicine concocting had improved, or perhaps it was because he was being overly cautious. Either way, even after concocting several batches of pills, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. Bai Xiaochun was elated, but at the same time, had learned his lesson from all the times in the past in which he proudly assumed that he had succeeded. Therefore, he continued to be very careful. Although it made things take more time, it also ensured that things went very smoothly. Time continued to go by. Bai Xiaochun would attend court every month, but most of the time, he just stood there bored, or even just closed his eyes and ignored what was going on. His only other main activity was concocting pills. A few more months passed. His cultivation did not progress as quickly as it had when he was eating heavenly dragonfish, but it grew more stable, and did experience some progress. From what he could tell, it would only take a few more years for him to reach the great circle of the demigod realm. In the months that passed, the court officials and the Saint Emperor noticed that he was keeping a low profile. There were no nasty incidents, and therefore, they began to breathe sighs of relief inwardly. On the outside, they were as sanctimonious as ever with both their smiles and words alike. To the people of the Saint Emperor dynasty, it didn't matter how much of a low profile Bai Xiaochun kept, he was still a foreigner. Bai Xiaochun simply pretended to not understand their condescending way of speaking. He spent his days concocting pills and working on his cultivation. Eventually, Saint Emperor City entered a period of protracted peace and quiet. The only person who wasn't happy was Heavenly Marquis Lu. He had been sharpening his proverbial swords as he waited for Bai Xiaochun to cause a problem, but even after all the time that had passed, nothing happened. All the peace and quiet was making Heavenly Marquis Lu very nervous. He must have hatched some big plot. Convinced of this, he began to watch Bai Xiaochun even more closely. And thus the days passed. Autumn became winter, and cold settled onto the lands of the Saint Emperor dynasty. Eventually, lotus seed pods began to appear on the surface of the water. When the cultivators of Saint Emperor City noticed this, they got very excited, and word quickly began to spread. The lotus seed pods are out. Don't tell me we're going to be blessed with a series of grand lotus banquets. The last time the lotus seed pods appeared was half a 60-year cycle ago. I heard that anyone lucky enough to eat some lotus seeds will have significant cultivation base advancement. It must be because His Majesty the Saint Emperor used that special divine ability on the heavenly pond earlier in the year. That's why the lotus seed pods have appeared earlier than usual. As word spread, crowds would gather at the edge of the lotus leaves to look at the lotus seed pods, of which there were dozens. Along with the pods came a fragrant aroma which filled Saint Emperor City, and would stimulate the cultivation base of anyone who inhaled it. There was such a buzz in the city that Bai Xiaochun heard about what was happening even though he hadn't left his residence. And before long, he was able to smell the unusual aroma. Lotus seed pods. Curious, he went out and started to ask around. What he discovered caused his eyes to light up. I was too focused on the heavenly dragonfish before. How could I have forgotten that the heavenly pond also has these other precious materials in it? He simply couldn't suppress the look of joy that appeared on his face. The reason Saint Emperor City had been built on this heavenly pond to begin with was because of the consummate immortal lotus which existed in it. It was the only lotus like it within all the eternal lands, and was the envy of the vile emperor himself. It was considered a precious treasure belonging to the entire city. Its roots spread far and wide, and although it only had one flower, it had many leaves. Furthermore, every 100 years or so, it would send lotus seed pods to the surface of the water. The seeds in those pods were nothing like ordinary lotus seeds, and in fact, once they were harvested, were almost like immortal pills. Such seeds were considered precious treasures within the Saint Emperor dynasty, and of course, the Saint Emperor had set strict rules regarding how they could be harvested. In fact, only he himself was qualified to do so. Furthermore, he would only harvest 1,000 seeds in total. Usually, from the time the first lotus seed pod appeared until the last, and all of the 1,000 seeds were harvested, only a few weeks would pass. Another custom was that, when the lotus pods appeared, and the seeds were harvested, the Saint Emperor would throw a series of banquets. All of the court officials would attend, and would sip on immortal alcohol while the Saint Emperor graced them with a performance of arcane magic. Then, he would reward certain individuals with lotus seeds. Of the total of 1,000 seeds, only about 300 or so would be given to individual members of the court. Another 200 would be given as rewards to people who had performed great services for the dynasty. An additional 200 would be sent out and sold at auction. The remaining 300 would remain in the imperial palace to be used as ingredients for concocting pills. A few dozen lotus pods had already reached the surface of the water, and therefore, everyone was already talking about the possibility of a series of lotus banquets. People throughout the two immortal domains controlled by the Saint Emperor dynasty were getting excited, and the major clans began to make preparations to send representatives to the capital city. Lotus seeds that are similar to immortal pills? Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but lick his lips as he thought about what he had learned. As Duke Heavenspan, I should receive one of them as a gift, right? His anticipation grew as a few more days passed. Then, the sound of tolling bells echoed out from the imperial palace. The lotus banquets that the court had been waiting for were about to begin. Trying to keep his excitement in check, Bai Xiaochun arranged his garments and headed toward the palace. Upon arriving, he saw that the huge square was filled with thousands of banquet tables, upon which was spread a variety of delectable alcohols and immortal fruit, which numerous palace handmaidens drifted about to serve. Quite a few important cultivators were already present, seated at various tables and engaging in small talk. Chen Su was there, as was Jiyu Tianjun and the other celestials. When Jiyu Tianjun caught sight of Bai Xiaochun, he simply looked the other way. As for Chen Su, he didn't really like him very much, but still plastered a warm smile onto his face. Most of the other important cultivators reacted similarly. The disdain that flickered deep in their eyes was something that most people wouldn't notice. But considering the level of Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base, and his familiarity with the nature of people, he could see it clearly. Well, if it isn't Duke Heavenspan. He's usually late when he comes to attend court, but now he's early. Duke Heavenspan comes from a very small world. Presumably, he's never even seen immortal lotuses before. Considering his rank, though, the Saint Emperor will probably give him a seed as a gift. Now that you mention it, I bet Duke Heavenspan is the first person from the Heavenspan realm to have ever eaten one of these immortal lotus seeds. Few ordinary people could be as lucky as him. He'd better make sure to eat it slowly and savor the flavor. Bai Xiaochun heard all of the talk about him, but merely cleared his throat and pretended he hadn't noticed. Laughing heartily, he found a spot near the front of the square, where he sat down in the crowd. Clearing his throat, he said unblinkingly, now that I think about it, I really miss how, back in the Heavenspan realm, I would constantly munch on 100,000-year-old lotus seeds. I would usually spit them out though. I mostly just put them in my mouth for the flavor. The aftertaste would last for a whole day, and was truly unforgettable. I'd assumed I would never enjoy that again. Who would have thought I would run into some immortal lotus seeds here? It's too bad there aren't any spirit tail chickens here. You know, there was one kind of immortal fowl back where I come from that evolved directly from the natural laws of heaven and earth. We called them heaven-destroying, earth-extinguishing spirit tail chickens. We would usually roast them with 10,000-year-old snow lotus seeds, and then add in a few 500,000-year-old immortal peppers. Now that is a flavor that will go with you through reincarnation. Sadly, I was only important enough to eat a few thousand of them. With that he sighed, the gleam of reminiscence flickering strongly in his eyes. Silence prevailed for a long moment as everyone nearby looked over at Bai Xiaochun, strange expressions on their faces. Bragging was nothing uncommon, but not this level of fakery. Furthermore, he said it with such a completely straight face that it seemed very convincing. Then people started thinking back to how he had bragged that the vile emperor essentially got lucky to not be kidnapped by him. At this point, Chen Su cleared his throat and changed the conversation topic, striking up a conversation about cultivation with Jiu Tianjun. The others present looked away, and began to chat and laugh amongst themselves again. No one brought up the lotus seeds again, apparently not wanting to give Bai Xiaochun a chance to brag. His boasting left them with goosebumps. A 100,000-year-old snow lotus. I guess it got lucky to not be picked for that long. Heaven-destroying, earth-extinguishing spirit tail chickens. Bragging is fine, but does he really need to take it so seriously? That name is certainly fancy enough. If that were true, then I bet if they had heavenly dragonfish, they would call them Starry Sky Invincible Immortal Realm Paragon Unmatchable Heavenly Dragonfish. The worst was the 500,000-year-old immortal peppers. Damn it, I've never heard of anything that's 500,000 years old. Cursing silently, everyone ignored Bai Xiaochun, which left him feeling quite pleased. Looking proudly over the crowd, he snorted in his heart. Although he didn't feel himself to be an accomplished braggart, if he was pushed far enough, he could unleash boasts the likes of which the eternal lands could likely not withstand. More excited cultivators began to arrive, including Preceptor Seedeep. Although Preceptor Seedeep hated Bai Xiaochun with a passion, he smiled and offered a polite greeting. Other people who Bai Xiaochun had given heavenly dragonfish also came up to chat a bit. They all despised him with a prejudice that their smiles could not hide. However, considering how much time Bai Xiaochun had spent in Saint Emperor City so far, he was used to it. In fact, if they ever changed their ways, he would find it odd. Since he was used to their way of interacting, he plastered a smile onto his own face and chatted amiably, taking every chance he was given to brag and boast. Soon, the seats were mostly full, and more bells tolled. Everyone went quiet as the Saint Emperor entered, smiling warmly as the crowd rose to their feet and bowed in greeting. After taking his place at the seat of honor, he looked around at the crowd and even gave Bai Xiaochun a nod. Sit, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the Lotus Banquet, in which I will bestow immortal lotus seeds upon many of you. Thank you, Your Majesty, everyone said in unison, and then sat. Bai Xiaochun followed along, then looked around in anticipation as he waited for the Saint Emperor to start doling out the rewards. He didn't have to wait long. Smiling, the Saint Emperor waved his hand, causing a powerful wind to kick up as a huge, illusory hand appeared up in the sky. It radiated a holy glow that caused shock to fill Bai Xiaochun's heart. As everyone looked on, the huge hand began to descend toward the heavenly pond. As it swept over the lotus pods that floated on the surface, they opened, allowing golden lotus seeds to fly out of them. The pods which had been harvested remained intact after the seeds were taken out of them, and slowly sank back down into the heavenly pond. The largest of the seeds were fist-sized, and the smallest were more like a walnut, or even smaller. In total, only a few dozen appeared within the palace in front of the Saint Emperor. The dozens of lotus seeds shone with golden light, and filled the entire hall with their fragrant aroma. At the same time, a thin mist appeared, making the imperial palace seem exactly like a celestial paradise. The aroma lifted the spirits of everyone present, and as for Bai Xiaochun, it caused his cultivation base to vibrate in anticipation. Celestial Chen Su, Celestial Ji Yu, Celestial Sima. You three are the protectors of the Saint Emperor dynasty. Without you, the dynasty would not exist. As I once said, it is important to share with those around us in creation, measly immortal lotus seeds included. The three celestials all rose to their feet and clasped hands formally, then accepted the large collection of lotus seeds that flew their way. The heavenly kings defend the dynasty, assisted by the various dukes under their command. As I have sworn, the blessings of heaven will most certainly be shared with you as well. The Saint Emperor waved his hand, sending another group of immortal lotus seeds out. Those who received them all bowed deeply in thanks. Of the first group of lotus seeds, only 5 remained, most of them smaller than a walnut. Clearly, these seeds were not fully ripe. As Bai Xiaochun saw the lotus seeds disappearing without a single one going to him, he started to get anxious. Feeling a bit jealous, he held his head high and his chest out, hoping to attract the attention of the Saint Emperor. Hey, I'm a duke too, he thought. Apparently, his actions worked. The Saint Emperor's eyes flickered, and after looking over at Bai Xiaochun for a moment, he hesitated, then waved his right hand. The other dukes and marquises who have performed services for the Saint Emperor dynasty will not be left out. The 5 remaining lotus seeds flew out, with one of them heading toward Bai Xiaochun. He reached out excitedly and grabbed it, but afterward, frowned slightly. It was impossible to tell if it was a coincidence or not, but it seemed like his lotus seed was the smallest and least ripe. The truth was that because of the heavenly dragonfish incident, the Saint Emperor didn't have a good impression of Bai Xiaochun at all. However, because of his title, and the loyalty the Heavenspan cultivators showed toward him, the Saint Emperor had to at least make a show of treating him well. On this first day, 49 immortal lotus seeds have been bestowed upon my dear subjects. There is no need to be anxious. All those who have performed services for the Saint Emperor dynasty will eventually be rewarded. The Saint Emperor didn't actually need to be present for the entire banquet. After offering a few more words of encouragement, he turned and left. After his departure, the buzz of conversation grew loud. Those who had received lotus seeds were of course congratulated by the cultivators around them, and before long, the sound of laughter filled the air. People crowded around Bai Xiaochun as well, and when they saw how small his lotus seed was, they mocked him in their hearts. On the surface, though, they offered perfunctory congratulations. Bai Xiaochun was feeling a bit depressed, but there was nothing he could do about it. After those around him finished with their congratulations, he looked around and noticed how some people were already consuming the lotus seeds they had been given. Therefore, he looked down at his and, seeing no reason not to, popped it into his mouth. Instantly, a pleasant aroma filled him, accompanied by a scorching heat. All of the energy passageways in his body thrummed for a full 10 breaths of time. After that, the heat vanished. And yet, he could sense that his cultivation base had risen with volcanic speed during that short time. Although he wasn't quite yet in the late demigod realm, the progress he had just made surpassed anything from the heavenly dragonfish. So incredible, he thought, shocked. He had known that the lotus seeds were extraordinarily effective, but could never have guessed that they would provide all those benefits in only 10 breaths of time. Furthermore, the seeds contained no impurities whatsoever, and also conformed automatically to whatever techniques were used by the cultivator who consumed them. They were like consummate medicinal pills that didn't contain even the slightest toxic element. 10 more. Or maybe even 5. With that many, I could reach the late demigod realm. His heart pounded and burned at how effective the lotus seeds were, and he couldn't stop pondering how to get more. Eventually, the banquet ended, and he went back home, where he sat down to think. The Saint Emperor definitely won't give me any more. There are plenty to be had in the heavenly pond. But getting my hands on them would cause a huge scene. If only I could harvest them secretly. Frowning anxiously, he looked out at all the lotus pods on the heavenly pond, filled with seeds that he couldn't eat. I ate thousands of fish. I refuse to believe that these lotus seeds will stump me. Bai Xiaochun felt like his ears were itching in frustration. He was determined to wolf down as many lotus seeds as he could, and yet, despite pondering the issue for an entire night, had nothing to show for it. He had no interest in attending the second lotus banquet. Instead, he strolled along the edge of the lotus leaf, looking at the seed pods that floated on the lake's surface, as well as those which were further down in the water, and had yet to rise. This Saint Emperor dynasty is way too rich, he muttered to himself, his eyes bloodshot. I can't believe they just keep dragonfish and lotus seeds sitting around in this heavenly pond of theirs. You can see them, but you can't eat them. If he were capable of beating the 3 celestials in a fight, and the Saint Emperor too, he would just have dived into the water and started grabbing seeds. His desire only grew stronger as time passed. After the destruction of the Heavenspan realm, and his arrival in the Eternal Lands, he had come to realize more than ever that getting stronger was the only way to achieve his goals. It was going to take a lot to achieve a cultivation-based breakthrough in these unfamiliar Eternal Lands. It would have been one thing if he had a lot of time on his hands, but right now, time was not something he had the luxury of wasting. A few days passed in which his anxiety fermented, and the lotus banquets continued. All of his energy was focused on trying to figure out how to get more lotus seeds, to the point where he spent every day walking along the edges of the lotus leaves. A lot of people noticed this behavior of his. But most people were wrapped up in thoughts about the lotus banquets. Besides, lotus seeds were not dragonfish, and everyone assumed it would be impossible for him to secretly harvest some. Furthermore, the Saint Emperor was no longer in secluded meditation. He was there every day, presiding over the lotus banquets. Because of that, the court officials who could guess what Bai Xiaochun was thinking didn't really give it much weight. We have rules in the Saint Emperor dynasty. Nobody, no matter how important they are, would ever think of taking an immortal lotus seed without permission. Anyone who did would be breaking a very important rule. Many a cold laugh echoed within the hearts of the people of the Saint Emperor dynasty. Of course, they all knew that Bai Xiaochun was important to the Saint Emperor. But even if he were more important than he already was, there were certain lines that could not be crossed. Bai Xiaochun had escaped any real punishment in the heavenly dragonfish incident, both because of his usefulness to the Saint Emperor dynasty, and also because of the fact that he had been very careful. Because of that, the Saint Emperor dynasty chose to simply let the matter slide. But the lotus seeds were inanimate objects that could not fly into Bai Xiaochun's hands of their own accord. The only way for him to get them would be to outright steal them. And if he did that, he would be doomed, no questions asked. Because of all of these things, most of the aristocracy didn't put too much thought into the matter. With the exception of Heavenly Marquis Lu. He had noticed Bai Xiaochun's odd behavior in recent days, and it immediately put him on guard. Filled with excitement, he began to surveil Bai Xiaochun even more closely than usual. Back when he had first been appointed parole captain, he had been very enthusiastic about monitoring Bai Xiaochun. But after a few months went by in which Bai Xiaochun behaved well, Heavenly Marquis Lu had begun to get nervous that nothing more would happen. You're as crafty as a rat, Bai Xiaochun. But you won't be able to evade my discerning eyes. When it came to monitoring Bai Xiaochun, Heavenly Marquis Lu couldn't see what happened inside of his blessed land, but as soon as he went out into the open, he could watch him secretly from the shadows. Another 3 days passed. The officials proudly continued to attend the lotus banquets, and Heavenly Marquis Lu maintained full vigilance. Bai Xiaochun eventually became aware that Heavenly Marquis Lu was shadowing him. But around the same time, he came up with a plan that he was fairly certain would succeed. This is the only way I can do it, he thought. From that point on, he didn't go to the heavenly pond to look at the lotus pods anymore. He remained in his blessed land, where Heavenly Marquis Lu couldn't see him. There, he performed an incantation gesture to seal the area, and then settled down cross-legged to meditate. Outside, Heavenly Marquis Lu found a good spot nearby to stake out Bai Xiaochun's blessed land, where he remained, eyes glued to the immortals' cave for several days in a row. He was so excited about what was to come that he didn't even get tired. He was absolutely sure that whatever evil plan Bai Xiaochun had come up with was about to be carried out. All I have to do is catch him in the act, and it will count as a huge service to the dynasty. The mere thought got him more excited, and he poured all of his energy into making sure that Bai Xiaochun didn't get a chance to harm even a single lotus seed. I don't care what your plan is. I know you're after the lotus seeds. And with me watching you so closely, you'll never be able to get them without being spotted. Eventually, Heavenly Marquis Lu was getting antsy with excitement, whereas Bai Xiaochun was still sitting there meditating. For several hours, he didn't even move, until finally, night fell. At that point, he surreptitiously sent some divine sense into his bag of holding. Get out here, little turtle, he said. However, there was no response. After the destruction of the Heavenspan realm, Bai Xiaochun hadn't seen the turtle, but was absolutely convinced that he was in his bag of holding. The end of the world would definitely not hurt him. Impatient, Bai Xiaochun yet again called out with his divine sense. Enough with the act. Get the hell out here, he snorted coldly, and yet, there was still no reaction. Not gonna come out, huh? Fine, let's settle accounts. Another long moment passed. You're really not there? He said, surprised. Shaking his head, he sighed. Well, that's too bad. I guess you won't have a chance at this treasure. Perhaps it was the word, treasure, itself, which was too enticing. As soon as he spoke it, he got a reaction from inside his bag of holding. Treasure? What treasure? The little turtle's voice was faint in his mind, as though he had been sleeping, and just woken up. However, it only took a moment for it to get back to normal. Alright, little Xiaochun, you tell Lord Turtle what treasure you found immediately. At this point, the little turtle's head popped out of Bai Xiaochun's bag of holding. Before Bai Xiaochun could even respond, he sniffed the air, and his eyes lit up. Aha! Lord Turtle has detected the aroma of treasure. Damn it, I didn't realize that all that blood I lost made me a lot less sensitive to treasure. Eyes widening with excitement, the little turtle prepared to burst into motion. Before he could, Bai Xiaochun grabbed him and shoved him back into the bag of holding. Keep your voice down, he said urgently via divine sense. We're being watched. In response, a spark of killing intent appeared in the little turtle's eyes. Who is watching the mighty Lord Turtle? Who dares to try to steal Lord Turtle's treasure? Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat and said, it's this guy named Lu Yang. He's staking us out right now. He's the one who wants to steal our treasure. How dare he? Lord Turtle will beat him to death. The little turtle hated nothing in life more than people who stole treasure from him. Hold on, we can worry about that later. Little turtle, look at how many lotus seed pods are in that heavenly pond out there. There are too many to count, and each one is like an immortal pill. You sneak out there and keep yourself hidden. We split things 30/70ths. I get the 70. After all, I'm the one who came across this treasure. Plus, I'll help cover for you. This was Bai Xiaochun's plan. Since the lotus seeds were inanimate objects that lacked any intelligence whatsoever, all he had to do was figure out a way to get them. However, because of who he was, and how many people were suspicious of him and watching him, he would get the stealthy little turtle to do his work for him. It was the perfect plan. The most difficult part was coming to an agreement on the split. He and the turtle haggled for a bit, and eventually agreed to split everything 50-50. Then, the little turtle blurred into motion, vanishing from the bag of holding and leaving the blessed land. Despite how closely Heavenly Marquis Lu was keeping watch, he didn't even notice the turtle speed past him. Some distance away, the little turtle looked back proudly at Heavenly Marquis Lu there in his hiding place. Then he suddenly began to burrow down into the ground. Before long, he was in front of one of the underwater seed pods, which he sniffed at a bit before opening his mouth and taking a big bite. After chewing it up, his eyes glittered. So, little Xiaochun wasn't lying. Crispy and delicious. Licking his lips, he ate the entire seed pod. After that, he realized he needed to be more careful, and began to go around carefully extracting seeds without damaging the pods. Before long, he was back in the blessed land, where he proudly threw 8 lotus seeds over to Bai Xiaochun. "Eat up," he said. Then he burped. Clearly, he had stuffed himself before coming back. The lotus seeds were very small, about the size of a fingernail. However, as soon as Bai Xiaochun laid eyes on them, his eyes lit up. Grabbing them, he stuffed them into his mouth. Although they weren't as strong as the one he had been gifted earlier, when they melted into his mouth, they gave birth to a huge blast of heat that roared through him. The night went by peacefully. Soon dawn was approaching, and Heavenly Marquis Lu remained outside of Bai Xiaochun's blessed land, unmoving and even unblinking. Although he was exhausted, he also couldn't suppress his exuberance. When the sky was bright, Bai Xiaochun swaggered out of his blessed land, causing Heavenly Marquis Lu to stir in excitement. However, he quickly realized that there was something strange about Bai Xiaochun. "Huh?" he murmured to himself. Bai Xiaochun seemed in extremely high spirits compared to normal. He didn't go to the edge of the lotus leaf like he had in the past, but instead, hummed a little tune as he headed toward the imperial palace. Something's wrong, Heavenly Marquis Lu thought as he began to follow stealthily. Bai Xiaochun strolled happily to the imperial palace, where a lotus banquet was going on. Although not every government official went to a banquet every day, the banquets were still lively and exciting. Like usual, snide and derisive comments could be heard when Bai Xiaochun came, but he ignored them like usual. Laughing heartily, he sat down to enjoy the delicious alcohol and wonderful immortal fruits. The Saint Emperor didn't attend every single banquet, but through his archean powers, he would always ensure that lotus seeds were distributed. Bai Xiaochun was in a wonderful mood. Heavenly Marquis Lu shadowed him the entire day, convinced that something fishy was going on. However, he couldn't pin down what exactly it was, and eventually, had to settle down again outside of Bai Xiaochun's blessed land to keep watch overnight. It was an act, he thought. He's doing all of this just to get the people used to seeing him. 5 more days flew by, and the same thing happened every time. It was nearing the end of the period of lotus banquets, and Bai Xiaochun was enjoying himself to the full. During the day, he would go to the imperial palace, and in the evenings, the little turtle would get some lotus seeds for the two of them to share. Although the seeds were all fairly small, they were numerous. In the few short days which had passed, Bai Xiaochun had already gotten his hands on over 1,000 of them. The sheer number involved outweighed how weak they were, and pushed Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base all the way into the great circle of the demigod realm. However, he made sure to keep the aura of his breakthrough suppressed. Now, he was one step closer to being a celestial. In fact, he was sure that it would likely only take a few years to form his Dao seed and achieve his breakthrough. Bai Xiaochun was aware that the little turtle had benefited even more than he had, although he wasn't sure by how much. The turtle's face glowed, and his shell looked smoother and shinier than ever. Considering how treacherous the little turtle was, Bai Xiaochun could only speculate that, if he had handed over 1,000 seeds, he had most likely eaten thousands himself. The more he thought about that fact, the more worried he got. Not that he felt bad for the Saint Emperor, but rather, was worried that their lotus seed stealing activities might be discovered. Be careful down there, and don't eat so many. Quit while you're ahead. The little turtle always agreed to comply with such repeated exhortations. Bai Xiaochun didn't feel any better about the situation, but it was too late to go back now. The worst came when, a few days before the lotus banquets were to end, the little turtle didn't return. Bai Xiaochun was instantly on guard. Don't tell me he got caught? Considering what Bai Xiaochun knew about the little turtle, he didn't have any confidence that he could keep a secret. Surprisingly, though, the Saint Emperor never came knocking. A few days later, the banquets came to an end, and the turtle still was not back. Bai Xiaochun was extremely nervous at this point. Ironically, there was one person who was even more nervous than Bai Xiaochun, and that was Heavenly Marquis Lu, who was still on watch outside of his blessed land. Damn it, what's going on here? Why has Bai Xiaochun been so calm and quiet? My intuition can't be wrong. He definitely has a secret master plan. As the two of them sat there anxiously, the last formalities to end the banquets occurred. Bells rang out from the imperial palace, drawing all of the officials for a final meeting in the palace hall. It would be the last distribution of lotus seeds by the Saint Emperor, and would also involve a ceremonial expression of thanks by the citizens. As people gathered, Bai Xiaochun was much quieter than everyone around him. He was in quite a perturbed state of mind, and was constantly glancing around at the expressions of the people around him, hoping to notice if anyone was looking at him strangely. Eventually, the Saint Emperor strode out and took his place in front of everyone. After looking around briefly, he smiled warmly. My dear subjects, I have already distributed 800 lotus seeds. Now, we will give all cultivators under the heavens a chance to acquire one of the final 200 by distributing them to the open market. It is my wish that our Saint Emperor dynasty will be just like lotus seeds that slowly grow into mature, beautiful lotuses that exist for all eternity. In response, the gathered officials all clasped hands formally and joined their voices to respond. May the Saint Emperor dynasty exist for all eternity. Despite how nervous he was, Bai Xiaochun joined in with them. The Saint Emperor's smile grew even warmer when he heard the voices of the hosts of officials. Then he waved his hand, unleashing the power of his Archean cultivation base. Instantly, a holy aura swept out, causing an enormous hand to appear high above. The water in the heavenly pond rippled, and numerous lotus pods floated up to the surface. The hand descended, sweeping over the pond to harvest the lotus seeds. However, this time, when the hand swept over the pods, no seeds came out. The pods opened to reveal empty holes where the seeds should have been. The huge hand suddenly stopped moving. The Saint Emperor was stunned, as were all of the court officials. Eyes went wide, and numerous streams of divine sense suddenly sprang out to check the situation. Chen Su, Gu Tianjun, and the scholarly Celestial were all flabbergasted. Bai Xiaochun's heart was already pounding as he sent his divine sense out. When he saw all of the numerous empty seed pods, he immediately plastered a look of shock onto his face. The Saint Emperor's expression slowly sank into something very grim. Waving his hand again, he caused more of the seed pods to rise to the surface and open up. Yet again, almost no seeds could be seen, only empty holes. The court officials all gasped, and a moment later, devolved into a hubbub. This, where are the lotus seeds? How could this be happening? Why are there no lotus seeds? All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun's voice rang out in extremely loud and exaggerated fashion. Heavens! How could this be happening? Don't tell me the heavenly dragonfish ate them all. Amid the cacophony of shocked exclamations, the Saint Emperor's expression turned even grimmer. Then, he performed an incantation gesture and waved his finger at the heavenly pond, sending a shocking stream of divine sense into the water. The sky went dim, and a huge wind kicked up as the water seethed and all of the lotus pods in its depths rose to the surface. Whether they were mature or not didn't matter. All of them rose up and then opened, over 10,000 in total. When the crowd saw the result, they were stunned. Everyone was shaken to the core as they saw that every single seed pod, without exception, was almost completely empty. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. But the Saint Emperor, the three celestials, all of the demigods, and even the devas saw that on one of the lotus pods was Little Turtle, munching away at a fist-sized lotus seed. When Bai Xiaochun saw the little turtle, his eyes went wide, and his heart began to pound even harder. He had assumed the little turtle had secretly eaten a few thousand seeds. Never could he have imagined that he would have eaten this many. Damn it, what kind of turtle is that? How dare he secretly eat the Saint Emperor dynasty's immortal lotus seeds? Look at how many of the pods are empty. He must have eaten tens of thousands of seeds. Damn it, I'm gonna turn him into turtle soup. The anger and the shouting of the crowd couldn't have been more apparent, and the Saint Emperor's expression continued to turn grimmer. Suddenly, he reached out with his right hand. The little turtle was incredibly fast, and usually was able to vanish without a trace, but in this case, he was no match for the Saint Emperor. Even as the little turtle prepared to teleport away, a magical ceiling settled down in the area surrounding him. He struggled, but to no avail. A moment passed, and then a powerful force grabbed onto him and sent him flying into the imperial palace in a beam of light, right into the outstretched hand of the Saint Emperor. The turtle was clearly frightened, and fought back with all four of his legs, but it did no good. As soon as he realized he had been captured by such a terrifying figure, he shrieked, "I was forced to do it. It was Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun made me do it. He's the ringleader in this whole thing. You people have no idea. He's a walking disaster. He forced me to steal the lotus seeds. I'm completely innocent. I'm the victim. When the cultivators in the infuriated crowd heard the little turtle's words, they slowly turned to look at Bai Xiaochun. To have so many people staring at him caused Bai Xiaochun to break out into a cold sweat. Although he knew that the little turtle was a scoundrel who wasn't exactly the trustworthy type, he had never imagined that it would immediately sell him out. What was worse was that the little turtle had personally taken what was likely tens of thousands of lotus seeds, and had only given 1,000 to Bai Xiaochun. Inwardly, Bai Xiaochun was cursing up a storm, but on the outside, he simply looked startled. Then he leapt to his feet and pointed an accusatory finger at the little turtle. Who are you? And how do you know my name? Your Majesty, this is a conspiracy. Somebody is definitely framing me. From the rage that seemed to echo in his voice, he was clearly furious at being unjustly accused. If it weren't for the matter of the heavenly dragonfish, the surrounding cultivators would likely have been convinced. But now, it seemed obvious that this little turtle was working together with Bai Xiaochun. The turtle was accusing Bai Xiaochun, whereas Bai Xiaochun was accusing the turtle. Obviously, they were the seed thieves, and now, they had been caught red-handed. Worse was that the Saint Emperor had just been about to harvest 200 lotus seeds to be sold at auction to the general populace. The Saint Emperor himself wouldn't benefit from the resulting auctions, but many of the officials present would have. There were numerous factors that played into the lotus seed auctions, factors which ensured that everyone involved profited. But now, there would obviously not be any auction. With 70% of the lotus seeds gone, the Saint Emperor obviously wouldn't be doing any more harvesting. The lotus pods had been so heavily damaged that it would be a long time before there were any more lotus banquets. That realization caused fury to boil up in the hearts of the Celestials, whose clans would definitely be affected negatively by this development. Important clans like theirs had huge operating expenses, and now, they would be losing out on a very important source of income. How brazen and reckless of you, Bai Xiaochun. How dare you steal the immortal lotus seeds? Saint Emperor, I would like to submit an official request to the court that Bai Xiaochun be executed. Your Majesty, I second the motion. This Bai Xiaochun must be punished immediately. The imperial palace instantly became like a hornet's nest, with raw killing intent surging in all directions. If it weren't for the fact that they were actually in the imperial palace, many of the cultivators present would have already started fighting Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was sweating hard, and gasped numerous times in response to what people were saying. Scalp tingling in fear, he was just about to open his mouth to speak when he suddenly noticed that the little turtle had just winked at him in odd fashion. Then, the turtle cleared his throat and spoke in a high-pitched voice that cut through the crowd. My noble ladies and gentlemen, everything I did was on the orders of Bai Xiaochun. He is my master, and I have no choice but to follow his commands. Bai Xiaochun was glaring furiously at the turtle, but inside, he was actually a bit curious. After all the years of dealing with the little turtle, he had come to know him well, and could tell that there was something very odd about the way he had winked a moment ago. And the fact that the turtle had immediately accused him in loud and public fashion seemed to indicate that he was planning something. The entire place was in complete chaos. Numerous cultivators were submitting requests to the Saint Emperor, the little turtle was yelling at the top of his lungs, Bai Xiaochun was shouting. It was a madhouse. At this point, Gu Tianjun suddenly spoke in a voice as cold as ice. Killing intent was visible in his eyes as he stared at Bai Xiaochun and said, Saint Emperor, this Bai Xiaochun absolutely must be put to death. He has committed a capital offense of truly shocking nature. And I'd wager that the giant ghost fellow is in on the conspiracy. He should be killed too. Heavenly Marquis Lu was there in the crowd, his eyes shining brightly. Ever since he had been put in charge of keeping an eye on Bai Xiaochun, he had been unable to find any incriminating evidence. No matter how hard he tried, not a single clue had ever turned up. But now that the little turtle had been discovered, everything made sense. Heavenly Marquis Lu couldn't help but get excited at the sight of Bai Xiaochun being cursed by everyone in the crowd. Ah, what a familiar scene, he thought, trembling in excitement. It's just like what happened in the Grand Heaven Master's Hall in Arch-Emperor City. That was also the first time I lost to Bai Xiaochun. The heavens do have eyes. The same thing that happened back then is happening today, but this time, I definitely won't lose. With that, he threw his head back and laughed maniacally. Striding out into the open, he ignored the rest of the crowd to glare at the turtle for a moment. Then he clasped hands and bowed deeply to the Saint Emperor. As of this moment, Heavenly Marquis Lu felt like he was one with all creation. Raising his voice loudly, he said, "Your Majesty, I have summarized 500 crimes that this Bai Xiaochun has committed, and would like to take the opportunity today to list them out publicly. First is the crime of..." However, before he could even speak out the first crime, the Saint Emperor, who stood there in front of the crowd holding the little turtle, threw his head back and laughed uproariously. His crisp, clear laughter filled all of Saint Emperor City, causing heaven and earth to shake violently. Heavenly Marquis Lu was interrupted, and the fury of the gathered officials was suddenly suppressed. "Good, great, excellent." The Saint Emperor then laughed some more, his face a mask of joy and excitement as he eyed the little turtle. Considering that he was an Archean, it was unusual to see him acting in such emotional fashion. Everyone was shocked, and had no idea what was going on, except for the three Celestials. Their eyes flickered as they looked at the little turtle, and a moment later, looks of astonishment could be seen on their faces. "The Eternal Turtle," the Saint Emperor said, his voice quavering a bit. "The Eternal Turtle. It's the Eternal Turtle. The legendary, one-of-a-kind, completely unique companion spirit of the Eternal Flower. To have the Eternal Turtle in Saint Emperor City is a good omen. It shows that the Saint Emperor dynasty is the true and orthodox force in the Eternal Lands, something that will stand the test of time and endure forever." Bai Xiaochun was stunned. Back when the gravekeeper had extracted blood from the little turtle to help Bai Xiaochun, he remembered hearing something about an eternal turtle, but he had been mostly unconscious, and had never pursued the matter. Eventually, the Saint Emperor flicked his sleeve and issued a proclamation. "Let the Eternal Turtle be named the Saint Turtle of the Saint Emperor dynasty. This turtle is now the symbol of our nation, and represents me wherever he goes. For offering this turtle as a gift, Bai Xiaochun will be given a 7-colored belt, and 10 immortal pills." Gasps could be heard from the gathered cultivators as they looked over at the little turtle. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.